Have you ever thought about where exactly in the law and history did our right to keep and bear arms come from? Well, as we've been observing the passing and the funeral processions of Queen Elizabeth II in England, now's the time to recognize and discuss how our right to keep and bear arms actually came from jolly old England. Let me explain when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, best-selling author, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, and member of the United States Supreme Court Bar. If you have not subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner Second Amendment channel, please do so and show your love for the right to keep and bear arms. All right, folks, we know that the Second Amendment, let's make this clear, that the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms does not give us any rights. The right to keep and bear arms, as articulated by the Second Amendment in the United States Constitution, recognizes that there are certain pre-existing rights that exist even without a Bill of Rights. And the right to keep and bear arms is a pre-existing right. That's what, among others, the Supreme Court has pointed out. And if you read the sentence properly, think about how the Second Amendment's written, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If you just read that slowly and think about it, you can see that it presupposes the existence of a right that the Second Amendment is there to help protect. So not only is it a pre-existing right textually, but also, of course, historically in the Supreme Court's precedents all say the same thing. But where exactly did this right come from? Well, in light of the recent passing of Queen Elizabeth II, and my condolences to my friends in England. I'm sure many of you over there are saddened by the passing of the great lady, Queen Elizabeth II. But in light of that passing, I thought now would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about where our Second Amendment comes from. Because you see, our right to keep and bear arms actually stems from the 1689 English Declaration of Rights. And you should know a little bit about this so you can be, of course, as you know, the smartest person in the room. Now, I try not to give you a lot of crazy history to remember, but I think you should really remember the Declaration of Rights from England in 1689. Why is that? Because it is a right to keep and bear arms in England that was specifically designed to rebut and deal with a tyrannical king. At least that's what the English thought, a tyrannical king of James II. You see, back then, before 1689, James II was the King of England, and he was a Catholic. And that is extremely important because what James II did was he tried to disarm his English enemies. Specifically, James II, the King of England, tried to disarm the Protestants in that country because he was a Catholic king and wanted to lord over them and did not want Protestants to have firearms or guns or weaponry of any sort. You see, James II, the King of England, wanted to make sure he disarmed all the Protestants in England because he was a Catholic and wanted to make sure that he and his colleagues, if you will, the people that follow James II, the Catholics of the country, could lord over the Protestants. So he tried to disarm the Protestants. But what happened, of course, is the Protestants fought back and they said, we're going to overthrow James II because he's tried to, among other things, disarm us. So what the Protestants did wisely is they went over to the Netherlands and they talked to William and Mary, two individuals, and William and Mary, won't bore you with the details of that, but William and Mary from the Netherlands came over to England with an army, and James II, when he saw this army was coming to dethrone him, James II, the Catholic, resigned and abdicated and ran away and ceased to be the King of England. And the new King of England turned out to be William and his wife Mary. That's where you can get the name of the college, for example, in Virginia, William and Mary. So William and Mary became the new King and Queen of England, and they cut a deal with the English Parliament in 1689. And what is this deal with the English Parliament, which is kind of their England's version of our Congress? So what exactly did King William and Mary? Well, they agreed to create the English English Declaration of Rights, the English Bill of Rights. It specifically recognized that you have an ancient right to bear arms. That's what they said. And one of the reasons why you have an ancient right to bear arms is to overthrow tyrannical rulers like then James II the Catholic. And of course, William and Mary were Protestants, and the Parliament were Protestants, and they wanted to get rid of James II, which they then did. And then they enacted the 1689 English Declaration of Rights, which guaranteed the right to bear arms, but they specifically pointed out that they're not creating the right to bear arms. They said the right to bear arms in England was an ancient right that pre-existed the English Declaration of Rights in 1689. Also, as part of the creation of the English Bill of Rights, part of this was that, the English would often be called out to hunt down criminals with their own private arms. It sounds familiar, sounds like a militia here in America. And that was essentially what they were doing over there. Now, there's a critical fact that I want you to understand about the 1689 English Declaration of Rights and how it compares with the American Bill of Rights in the Second Amendment. This is extremely important to understand because keep in mind that a lot of the anti-gun lawyers are trying to use English law to restrict and limit our right to keep and bear arms here in America. And how do they do that? They cite to old English laws, such as something called the Statute of Northampton, which they tried to use in the NYSERPA versus Bruin case, but the Supreme Court threw it aside. They argued the Statute of Northampton banned the carrying of firearms, which was an absurd interpretation, but that's what they tried. But here's what you must keep in mind, that whenever you talk about, it's perfectly fine, of course, to talk about the English Declaration of Rights in 1689, but keep in mind that that was the floor, that was the baseline of our American patriot fathers who wanted that to be a floor, but then they added on and gave us additional rights. How do we know this? The first way and the best way that we know that the American Second Amendment was supposed to be broader than the English Bill of Rights, even though the English Declaration of Rights was very good, is that the English Declaration of Rights was limited to benefit Protestants. Specifically, it said that Protestants had the right to keep and bear arms in England and not necessarily Catholics. In the United States, of course, if you keep in mind, how did the Second Amendment written? Well, the Founding Fathers wanted to expand on the English right to keep and bear arms and expand it to Americans. And one of the ways they did this in the most obvious way is that our Second Amendment is not limited to any particular group of people. It's the right of the people. The people in its entirety in the United States have the right to keep and bear arms, unlike in England where in the Declaration of Rights, it was only preserved for the Protestants and not for Catholics because they were an ongoing religious war. And side note, that's why we also have the First Amendment that says no establishment of religion, because we didn't want to have religious fights over what was our country. Was our country Catholic? Was it Protestant? What was it? We didn't want to have those fights here in the United States, which is why we have a First Amendment as a side note saying that we cannot establish a national religion because they didn't want to have religious wars like they had seen in Europe, including in England, where the Protestants were trying to disarm the Catholics were trying to disarm the Protestants. They didn't want this. So that's why, among other things, they wrote the Second Amendment to say the right of the people, all of the people have the right to keep and bear arms, and not just some of the people. And my final point is this. The 1689 English Declaration of Rights is clearly an example of how the right to keep and bear arms in the Anglosphere or in the Western world, whatever you want to call it, is specifically designed to deter and, if needed, overthrow tyrannical governments. Because what happened in the English Declaration of Rights, the way it arose, was you had this usurperous, terrible in the minds of Englishmen, King James II, who was disarming the Protestants and doing other terrible things, and he effectively got overthrown by the Protestant King William and Mary and the Parliament and got kicked out of the country and forced to abdicate his throne. And the first thing they did when William and Mary takes power from James II is they allow all of the Protestants to have their arms. Why is this? And why was James trying to take away the guns? Because of the ancient right to keep and bear arms and the ancient right of self-defense. So this is a classic example, and our Second Amendment rights comes from this point, comes from this period in history where, again, the view was making sure that you had armed citizens was mission critical to making sure you did not have more tyrannical rulers like James II in England. That was the view, of course, of the Protestants, Parliament, and William and Mary at the time. And that was a major component of the right to keep and bear arms, in addition to dealing with criminals and just the ancient right you had as an Englishman. Okay, I hope you learned a little bit something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.